Welcome in, Hawks fans. It's been an eventful Monday in Atlanta Hawks news. Multiple things we have to get to in the Believe in Hawks episode today. First, obviously, Landry Fields, general manager for the Atlanta Hawks, fired today by the Hawks. Onsi Saleh, who we picked up from the Golden State Warriors. Sorry if I say his first name wrong. Who we picked up from the Golden State Warriors to become an assistant GM last offseason, now has been promoted to general manager, and the Hawks have began a search for the president of basketball operations. So we'll talk about that, reaction to the move, why the move happened, all that good stuff. Then the Hawks getting some positive news on the draft front. Tiebreaker session was held today by the NBA to determine which teams would get tiebreakers for certain picks that the Hawks and other teams could get. Here's a hint. Hawks got the best case scenario, so I'll talk about that today. And then lastly, Trae Young back in the news again. Not for anything he said, but based off a conversation he had last week with reporter Chris Haynes, him coming out today and saying that basically Trae Young wants to be here, wants the Hawks to turn the corner while he's here, and sounds like that the star point guard is committed to the Atlanta Hawks franchise. Another indication throughout this season and now offseason that Trae Young is not planning to go anywhere. So we'll talk about all that today on the Believe in Hawks podcast. I appreciate you guys tuning in for this episode. Definitely, if you enjoy this episode, subscribe, like the video, leave a comment down below about anything we talk about today. Follow me on X at Bryce_2K. And then also don't forget, if you sometimes cannot catch the video on YouTube, this podcast is available on any podcast platform available out there. If you guys want to catch me wherever, on the road, cleaning your house, whatever you want to do, all of that works. All of that does what we need it to do. So, yeah. So let's go ahead and dive right in. So, as I mentioned, Landry Fields, in a move that for most reaction, from most people, from most reporters, from most community members, from most fans, surprised a lot of people. Obviously, I think the big reason is that if you look at the Hawks situation, you look at Zach, Dyson, guys like that they've gotten over the last offseason, and Jalen, who's the guy, and Kongu and things like that. People came out of the year feeling like the Hawks had a bit of a direction. You have a young talent, they're getting better. Obviously, they need to stay healthy, but you're thinking, okay, this is gonna, there is a path here. But we also knew this was a very big offseason for the Atlanta Hawks. The Hawks knew next year we got to be the playoffs. Next year, I believe, was playoffs or bust, for sure. And I told you Quinn would be under pressure to win, which also would mean the front office. So to make this move now tells me there's some different things going on behind the scenes that we aren't aware of. Or they didn't believe in Landry to be able to do the things that were going to be necessary this offseason to get the Hawks over the top. Another thing I've been hearing about, Brad Rowland's talked about, is that Landry is a guy where it was truly a collab in the front office. He didn't have as much power as other execs in his position. And so then questions are being raised about the selection of Zach, the trade of Dyson. Was that a Landry Fields call? Or was that Saleh's call? Or was that Korver's call? There's the thing about this, and obviously there's always collaboration when you have these front office gigs, but you usually sometimes a lot of people think though that there's a top guy who makes the decisions outside of, I guess, if the owner wants to put butt in, which I know a lot of people are not happy with Tony Ressler either. And they said Landry never had the power, so now there's questions about how much he actually had on the team. And we may, unless someone drops the tell-all article, we may never know what that could be or what it was, right? But either way, they clearly felt like they needed to move on from him now. Some people have talked about they didn't like the fact that because they've made this move now, they allowed Landry to have those exit interviews with players, have the press conference after the exit interviews with players, and talk to the audience, talk about his trust in Quinn, talk about the direction they want to go this offseason. And based off those conversations, I feel like this decision with Landry was a very quick one. This was not a decision that they've been thinking about since last week. Though Brad also posted on his Twitter that he heard rumblings that Landry could be on the hot seat. But again, it was a rumbling. It wasn't a lot. He didn't even expect it to happen. Like I said, a lot of people didn't expect that. So clearly something accelerated this process for the Hawks management and Tony Ressler to go ahead and make the call. Right? I think one thing, that a lot of people take out of this is Tony Ressler, because I think Tony Ressler has been a very controversial owner for the Hawks. On one hand, he renovated the former Phillips Arena to State Farm Arena, renovated it, put investment into the team in terms of the things like that, fan experience and et cetera for the team. But a lot of people have questioned him being involved in basketball decisions. That's where a lot of the issues, a lot of the problems have come. I said what happened today with Landry kind of reminds me a bit of what happened when they made the Interconference Finals. If y'all remember that year, I think the Hawks came off a bad year. They were still in a tanking team. I think it was Trae's second year, I believe. And if you remember, randomly, Tony Ressler was like, we want to make the playoffs, be aggressive. And then they made it some more aggressive deals, moves to get this team into the postseason, which actually led to them having a lot of success. And this kind of reminds me of that. It just feels like except the Hawks weren't coming off like a 20-win season where it's like, oh yeah, like they're not really good and they have to do a lot to get over the hump. Hawks right now may not be a championship contender, but they're very close to being a playoff team. So, I mean, you're healthy Jalen Johnson away from that being the case. A lot of people are upset with Ressler because people feel like he's not sticking to a plan. One of the biggest things in sports is when you have these front offices, these head coaches, people always talk about stability. The best franchises have stability. The best franchise has, they always give people the right amount of time to do what they need to do to show if they can do it. And there isn't a knee-jerk reaction to different things. There isn't random changes being made. And I think people feel like with Ressler, he's done that at times. I mean, obviously, you remember the Travis Slink situation. And the craziest thing about Landry Fields is he was promoted to GM when they fired Travis Slink, and now Landry Fields today has gotten the same fate. He is fired for someone they hired last year as an assistant GM and now promoted him. A lot of people don't like that. A lot of people feel like, as an exec for the president of basketball operations, why would you want to come to Atlanta if they could easily knee-jerk reaction the front office like that? That could be a concern. People have questioned Ressler's desire to win because he hasn't opened up the pocketbook. Ressler has said that he will open it up when they win. They haven't won in a few years, so he's sticking to that. But at the same time, people feel like if we're going to win, you kind of have to, because this isn't a hot free agent destination. People aren't just sitting here dying to play in Atlanta, so you got to give a little bit more to convince them to come this way. And so a lot of people are just very about that situation in general. But back to Landry. Landry is a guy who, listen, has he made some mistakes? Yes. No GM goes 100%. But he also, especially this past offseason, which people, again, if he was the one behind the main cause of these decisions, added two guys who are now in finalists in NBA award conversations. And like I said, it felt like the team now coming out of the season has a direction moving forward because of the youth and the talent they have on the roster. But the thing is about this move that I've heard a lot of is Landry, because of his inexperience when he got the job, never had the respect, the cachet, whatever you want to call it, in league circles. And that's why when it came to trades, it always felt like the Hawks almost got a guy. It always felt like the Hawks were close, but they could never get the job done. Everybody has relationships with guys in the league. You hope that guys have relationships with guys in the league. And so you never know, good relationship with another GM might result in that GM allowing you to get a certain package from them instead of a guy who maybe new to the scene, doesn't have relationships with guys. Obviously, Landry was a former player, but we don't know how that translates to guys in the front office and how that played out. And so I think people wonder if that hurt him when it came to certain trades. It hurt them when they came to certain decisions. Overall, I think I think Landry, to me, I assumed he was, like I said, he was going to get one more year to try to kind of figure some things out. The team has to make postseason next year and go from there. And like I said, the GM position for the Hawks is such a weird one because of just the fact that there are other voices. So again, I don't know how much Saleh is going to actually have in terms of picking players. Because let's talk about the DeJounte Murray trade for a second. If you remember that trade, people forget Travis Slank didn't want DeJounte Murray. It was the ownership group. It was Resslers who wanted DeJounte Murray because they were like, we need to get a star. We need to get a star. We need to get a star. They were desperate for a star. And they just said, you know what? Let's get DeJounte Murray. Make it happen. And that didn't work out for Atlanta. And Travis Slank also, because of the fact he didn't want that, led to the dysfunction between the Resslers and him. And that also led to him being fired. Being demoted, then fired. Basically demoted into being fired, basically. And so, again, that's why I asked the question of the GM process. Who's making the calls exactly? Is Ressler involved in these decisions? Clearly, that's why, again, a lot of people are not really happy with Ressler being the owner because they said he needs to get out of basketball decisions. You need to trust your president of basketball operations, and you need to trust your GM and coach and whoever else you have in the collab process. Kyle Korver is still also an assistant general manager to allow them to make decisions to help to see if they can build this team the right way. And so I think a lot of Hawks fans have pitched their opinion. I've seen reactions from all over. I've seen positive. I think he actually has done a better job than people have said. I've seen people say, maybe you're taking another step as an organization, and maybe Landry just was never in the plans when the team took that next step to be a part of that. These are all possibilities for the Atlanta Hawks and what could have happened or what that could have led to this decision today that shocked a lot of people. And we'll have to see. I think this move also can indicate that the Hawks may be looking to make a big move this offseason, that they may be looking to be aggressive this offseason. Obviously, we won't know till we get there, but you usually make a move like this it wouldn't make sense to fire Landry if you're going to kind of do the same thing you've done the last couple of years. The thing is, we don't know, though. Some people have said that the Hawks need to go get a star. Some people have said that they just need to completely retool the bench and allow the starters to continue to grow and get better. Trae Young has mentioned, obviously, in some interviews about, hey, next year I hope I'm worrying more about wins and losses than development, even though we've seen some good development. I'm sure Quinn, I feel like Quinn is also kind of a guy who's probably looking at, all right, we got to take the next step next year. And so I'm curious to just kind of see what the fallout of this situation is. Because here's the thing now with this, now the people who, outside of Kyle Korver, who brought in Quinn isn't there anymore. So listen, I've said it, like I said, I thought Quinn was on a year of pressure next year. I don't know if this ratchets up the pressure for him, because at the end of the year, it's like, at the end of the day, if the expectation is still the same, it's the same to be in the playoffs next year. But what exactly is it? Just making the postseason? Is it winning a series? Like, what is that? Because again, Ressler was, I guess, I'm assuming Ressler was a part of that decision as well, and Korver is still there. But like I said, I don't know how much of an integral part Landry was of that decision. So, we'll see how this impacts Quinn. I don't think this is going to impact Trae. I know some people have asked about this. I feel like some people wonder, did Trae say anything to the Hawks about Landry, about getting him out of there? There's always these theories that are going to be thrown out there because nobody knows what started the conversation, what created this. Was it results based? Was it something else? Ressler mentioned that in his press release. He said, hey, we're looking for some senior executive leadership and that we're always constantly reevaluating so we can help the team get better. Clearly, it sounds like he wanted a guy with more cachet and more well-known, more of a reputation around the league than Landry Fields. And just they had Saleh on the staff this past season, then the question has to be asked, was this always the plan? Were they always planning to fire Landry? I mean, these are questions that I think a lot of people have. This is why we need a beat reporter, but the big organizations don't want Hawks to have one. Or else we can get that tell-all story. So we just got to hope a national reporter takes the time out to do it. But let's take a quick look at the Atlanta 2025 roster situation. Obviously, right now, your starting five is Trae, Dyson, Zach, Jalen, Okongwu. Right now, your reserves under contract right now are Vic Krejci, Kobe Buffkin, Terrence Mann, Georges Niang, Mohamed Gay, and Dominic Barlow. The free agents the Hawks will have this offseason will be Clint Capella, Garrison Matthews, Larry Nance Jr., Karis LeVert, Keaton Wallace, and Dominic Barlow. Those are your free agents. Hawks will have a projected $155 million in salary, which includes the first-round pick salary. And then they're about 28. Yep, they're about 20. Actually, hold on a second. They're about 32 million off of the tax threshold and about 40 million away from the first apron, based off what you probably see on your screen from Bobby Marks in terms of the offseason situation on your screen. Or if you're listening, that's the projected salary and how far they are away from those benchmarks. They have now the Kings' 13th pick if they get it, and the Lakers' 22nd pick. So they will have 2 picks in the first round this year, unless there's still a chance they won't get the pick if the Kings somehow jump into the top 4. But it's extremely unlikely. You have a non-tax mid-level exception. You have a biannual exception. You have 4 trade exceptions, obviously a second-round exception, and a veteran minimum. So that's what the offseason roster number situation is looking like going into the season or going into the offseason. So whoever they bring in, and I've said this, and I said this earlier in the space, I said whoever they bring in, at the end of the day, they have an image, they have a vision, and they have an idea of where they want this to go and what they want this team to look like and what they think they need to do to take the next step. So they're clearly looking for someone who they think can execute that vision. And if they do, I always say, you gotta, in today's NBA's climate, it's changed. You cannot just throw a bunch of stars together like the Phoenix Suns and win. You got to make sure there are some pieces there that are there, and then you need to. And if you want to get a star, make sure the star fits with the team, and then make sure you have enough to surround the core parts of that team to be able to make a run. That's how you build a team nowadays. Cannot just throw a bunch of crap together. I also think a lot of people don't believe the Hawks are going to just all of a sudden, with a young core, destroy the young core. Obviously, some people have already talked about Jalen being traded. Some people say, do you trade Zach? Does Okongwu get on the market? People are already asking those types of questions to acquire a guy. We've heard Zion Williamson's name. We've heard Giannis's name. Because, listen, if they get cooked by Pacers, does Giannis request a trade? These are all things that people are going to be looking at and keeping an eye on. The playoffs could lead to some results of things. I mean, shoot, I've even heard some rumblings like Jalen Green in Houston. He continues to struggle in the playoff series. Do the Hawks look at trying to acquire him? It's one of those things where there's so many directions for this team to go, and there isn't just one step, and there isn't just one direction. So whoever they bring in, they just need to make sure that they have it. Because I'm assuming that they want a person with a vision, basically about, okay, you're going to work with our GM and help us get to the next step. Now, obviously, Saleh came from Golden State. They've dipped into the Golden State bag a little bit. So he's been around some winning. He's been around winning culture. He's been around those guys. A very popular name I've heard for president of basketball operations has been Bob Myers. A lot of people have mentioned, why don't the Hawks try to go get Bob Myers? We'll see if Bob Myers is interested in getting back into that. We'll see if the Hawks can even make that call and see if he'll listen. He's a name I've heard a lot of just because of the Warriors connection there as well and the success he's had with Golden State. Now, Bob Myers doesn't have the best track record in terms of drafting, but you have, like I said, some young players in place where, depending, you may not have to lean on that as much. I've also heard the guy who got fired from the Denver Nuggets, Booth, as another name who some people say should be looking to bringing him. Obviously, he didn't have a good relationship with Mike Malone from reports after the firing of them both. So is that a guy the Hawks looking to? A name that was mentioned early in the process, Elton Brand. I know that's been a very split reaction. He hasn't had a lot of success in Philly lately. Some people wondering if Elton Brand's one of the worst people we can get for the job. The Hawks are going to interview a few people unless they have one person that they are targeting. Sometimes the fact that when reporters mention a name and nobody else, that may be an indication of who the Hawks are aiming for. And we'll have to see. People forget Elton Brand is a legend. He was a part of the, I believe he was part of the Eastern Conference Finals team. Or I think the first one with Jeff Teague in them. So he has some history in Atlanta. But, I think a lot of people are very much going to keep an eye on any news release, any interview being conducted by the Hawks on who they want to pair with Saleh in the front office. Because that's essentially what you're doing. You're essentially hiring a new player of basketball operations. Remember, Landry was both. So now you're basically adding a new guy to the. So you had Korver, Saleh, Fields, right? Now you have Saleh, Korver, and whoever you hire for the president of basketball operations. So now you're going back to the 3-man model. Plus, we'll see if Ressler's involved. We'll see how much Quinn has in that position as well. And some people have even debated how this has impacted Quinn in terms of power. We did hear when Quinn was hired that he would also be in part of dialogue for this team. We don't know how much of a voice he's had in these discussions and these negotiations and these moves for players. Sometimes we'll hear the opposite of what some certain people say. I remember when they said he didn't want to trade DeJounte initially. I know that, that people wonder if he potentially could get more of a voice because of this, depending on who the GM could, or whoever the president of basketball operations could be. Some people wonder if Saleh and Quinn have already made certain decisions together, and that was one of the things that they may have led to Landry being let go. Like I said, all of it is pure speculation. We don't have answers, and we're all just guessing and hoping. But we all have our own opinions on what happened and what we want to happen with this team forward. At the end of the day, next season is crucial for this team. Crucial. They got to win. Simple as that. I mean, they got to make the postseason. Top 6 seed. I think that is the goal for this team. And you have to have a roster prepared for injuries, clearly, because that's been an issue, the depth on the roster. Again, huge issue going into the season. They didn't really have a backup 4 they could trust. Lost Jalen Johnson. That wrecked your season. So you would assume that they will try to fill out this roster with players they believe in. Obviously, again, with a new player of basketball operations in Saleh at the GM, remember, they outside of the last offseason, Saleh was not here when they got Mo Gay and all that. We'll see how he views those guys with the player of basketball operations. So certain guys like that, we'll see if they were coming in this offseason. Maybe Mo Gay could be the backup 4. They may say, nope, we need somebody else who we know can play for sure, 100%, not waiting on development, and go get a guy. I mean, these are all things that are potentially under evaluation with the Atlanta Hawks this offseason, and that this new front office makeover that we're having is going to have to make decisions on. We're going to have 2 new decision makers in that collaborative group that they have making decisions for this roster. So I'm curious to see what happens. Like I said, surprised that Landry was fired, but I'm not. It wasn't one of those situations where I'm upset. Like, I wasn't like, darn, they fired Landry. It's just one of those I wasn't expecting it now type of moves. I'm curious to see how this impacts other things. I am curious to see who they bring in. And like I said, the expectations are set for this team next year. They got to go get it done. I think Trae Young, like I said, wants to be able to, have a winning product next year and be able to make the postseason and see what happens. So, that's just everything that I've taken away from the day in terms of what's happening with the Hawks. But moving on. Now let's go into the draft picks, as I mentioned. The Hawks have now, in the tiebreaker thingy they had today on Monday, they will get, if the Kings get 13, they will get 13. The decision for the Hawks' first pick was, first, would they get it? And second, would it be 13 to 14? They would get 13 unless the Hawks can get into the top 4. So they have that pick. And then they also won the tiebreaker, a 4-way tiebreaker for the Lakers' 22nd pick. So, which, I mean, the Lakers won it, but obviously goes to the Hawks. So Hawks will have 2 first-round picks this year to work with. I have mentioned before that now I think that Lakers pick is a pick that you put with a player like a Man or Niang if you want to make a move, try to make a bench upgrade. Like I said, the Hawks have a lot of financial flexibility this offseason along with that. So there are definitely some things here they can do to try to, take the next step in that regard. And like I said, the draft evaluation is going on. I mean, their season ended, so they're going ahead drafting guys who could be available at those spots. And you got to go ahead. And I think the lottery is in a couple, like 3 weeks or so. Like I think May 12th. I could be wrong. But it's in May. So it's not that far away. So we will know something sooner rather than later in May on where the actual picks the Hawks will have officially. So really good news from that perspective that they were able to get those 2 picks. Really, really good news. And then lastly, I just want to briefly mention Trae Young. So Chris Haynes was on the Dan Patrick show today. And he talked about Trae Young and just, his future, like just trade to be traded, just trading to leave. And basically Chris Haynes came out and basically said, hey, I had a conversation with him last week, and based off that conversation, from what I took away is that Trae wants to be here in Atlanta. He's committed to turning the corner with this team, and he wants to find success here. Again, one of the big questions this offseason was the Trae Young extension. Obviously, we won't know truly until pen gets put to paper. With the shakeup with this front office, some people have wondered, does that increase the likelihood of Trae getting traded? Or does that increase the likelihood of them adding a star for Trae? Again, we don't know, but these are questions that are being asked. But one thing I think for sure is that Trae is committed. I've said throughout this entire season, Trae has came out on multiple occasions and defended his teammates, defended Quinn. He did not talk like a man who was trying to leave. Somebody said to me, well, players usually do that. That's not true. Think about a lot of the players who've been traded recently. They've given indications that they wanted to be traded before they were traded. Trae has given no indication. Even in his exit interview, he said, I definitely feel like I can win here. That doesn't sound like a man who's trying to leave. And so he's a key cog. We'll see if the Hawks still give him an extension. We will see if this impacts anybody's money with this move. But overall, Trae Young seems to be locked in. He seems to be ready to be an Atlanta Hawk and try to help this team move forward. Because they said, he talks like he expects to be in an Atlanta Hawks uniform next season. And so we have no choice. We have no reason to not believe that until we get some type of shams bomb or, whatever about his future. And then lastly, before I let you go, guys, got some stuff coming up this week. Wednesday, I'm doing a podcast with, I don't remember, you guys remember Derek and Raphael from the New Orleans Pelicans side of things. We are going to recap the Dyson Daniels, DeJounte Murray trade, kind of look back at how it impacted our seasons, and also talk about the Zion rumors with that now happening with both teams now going through GM changes. So I think we'll have a very interesting conversation that I'll get to either out Wednesday night or Thursday afternoon. And then Friday, if schedule holds, I'm also expecting to have Brad Rowland come on the show to talk about the offseason. Obviously, with today's events, could become a more juicy conversation. Brad is someone who is in the know of certain things sometimes in the organization, so we'll see what he can tell us and what he thinks about certain situations moving forward. So definitely want you guys to hit that subscribe button for all of that content coming out. I told you we're coming out with some good offseason content this offseason like we did last offseason, and we'll see what happens, man. So, like I said, big story of the day. Landry Fields fired. No longer GM. Onsi Saleh, former former person with the Warriors who promoted to who was assistant GM for the Hawks last year, is now the GM. Hawks have started their search for the president of basketball operations. So some shakeup happening with the Hawks in the front office order. We'll see who they bring in. We'll obviously keep an eye on that. Let you know if any hiring or any big decisions are made in that side of things. We'll see how it impacts anything this offseason. We'll see when we get close to the offseason, when reporters start getting out teams' plans for the offseason, what they say about the Atlanta Hawks. So really big time here for the Atlanta Hawks right now, but we'll see. So I appreciate you guys tuning in for another Believe the Hawks episode. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to the channel, like the video, leave a comment down below. Go ahead, audio listeners, leave a rating, leave a review, and follow me on X at Bricey_2K, BRICEY_2K, to keep up with all my talks. Very active on there today, talking about all the Hawks stuff going on. So, hey, what a start to the offseason, guys. What a start to the offseason. But it's your boy Bryce Lewis. See you next time.